We have been debating this in the last 20 minutes, standing out there, listening to the wild whoops of cheers for Mrs. Murthy. The question was, are we talking about stories as short stories? Are we talking about stories as any stories, non-fiction, fiction, short story, novel, graphic novel, whatever? Here, pass it on. And we came to the conclusion that actually it's a free-for-all because it's about storytelling and it's about how we, for all of us, some stories stand out, some stories become the stories we live by, remember forever. Is that our idea of great, or is there a canon that tells us what is great and we have to fall into that and say, okay, yes, and therefore I have to read these, which are the greatest stories ever in the world. So there's all these questions that come up, but what you have here is a panel of writers. Chandan is a writer in Hindi. Arunava is writing too, but he's done a lot of translations from Bangla and has also done from Hindi. Hindi? Yes. So he has a different experience of the greatest stories ever told. Preeti has also translated, anthologized a lot from the Northeast and languages different from what the others are working on. Thomas has translated and anthologized stories from Malayalam, and Manu from Odia. So there is a range of ideas and languages that all of these people operate in. And we thought maybe the best thing to do is for each of us, or each of them really, to talk about what they consider are the greatest stories that they have come to and why, and then we can think about what comes from there. So who wants to begin first? Preeti, you go first. You're in the middle.
Hello, everybody. This is going to be a tough act to follow after Sudha Murthy, of course. The fact, as Karthika has said, it's so very disparate, and all of us are coming from very different areas and looking at different languages, and some are writers and some are not. Personally, for me, I think, and this is what I was saying earlier, a story is something that just grabs your attention. It is something you think is important, even critical to put out. So those are the kinds of stories that speak to me personally. And as an agent, and even earlier as an editor, as a commissioning editor at a publishing house, those were the stories that called out to me. And because of the kind of experiences that I've had over the years in my publishing career, those are also the stories that have totally spoilt me. So I'm always sort of aligned to regions that have not been represented so much, to languages and to people who probably have not found a voice or have been heard very, very little. So people on the periphery, on the margins, languages on the margins, which is why, as Karthika mentioned earlier, I've been doing a lot of work in the Northeast. Those stories talk to me. Those regions have not been traveled as much. Those stories have not come out as much. Lately, it's also Punjab that attracts me. Again, an area bordering Delhi where all publishing activity takes place, but somehow neglected. So as a beginning, this is what I'd say.
Right. Thomas, do you want to talk about your idea of the great stories?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. You see, when you speak about story, like she said, it can be a newspaper story. Story as such, fiction, not even non-fiction stories are there. So, but I would, in spite of there being long-form novels and other forms of stories, I specialize in the short story because I did it as an academic discipline also for my dissertation and all. I did work on the short story. So it is naturally my choice is the short story, the short fiction form. And you see, in Malayalam we say, even not only me, but the leading critics also say that the Malayalam short story is the most powerful genre of fiction in Malayalam. So that, apart, that's a general kind of thing. But I'll go into the theme of the story, as not the technique, not the form, the theme as the main motivation for me to, read and translate. Um, I think I will begin with two examples, short ones. I'll not take much of a time. M.T. Vasudevan Nair's Karcha, Vision, is a story which, you see, I have anthologized in a recent anthology. And this story deals with the theme of women's autonomy, you know. It's about a blind grandmother. She's gone blind in her early 60s, and she's living like that. But she remembers her past, where she could choose her husbands according to her kind of compatibility with the man she chooses to live with, That was her decision, her choice. But this granddaughter, Sudha, a bank employee, she's having a very, not a quarrelsome conjugal life, but for 5 years she has been living with a man whom she cannot, consider her husband, that kind of a relationship. No quarrels, nothing, but that's kind of, she wants to break away from it, and she has broken away finally. And she has come home, but all the gossip mongers, including her close, intimate classmate, the former classmate, they all blame her, including her mother, sisters, everyone. But this grandmother embraces her, So the title of the story, Karcha, Vision, is of a blind lady. The blindness is only outside. The vision she has inside her, which, sets her free, the granddaughter. This is the plot, but the way M.T. Vasudevan Nair has presented the story, it's really, it is.
So you think it's a story that is a landmark in Malayalam fiction?
It is, yeah. It is at the turn of the century, about 1998, it was.
Okay.
The second one is M. Mukundan's, he's sitting here, M. Mukundan's Photo. Photo is a shocker, like his Delhi 1981, or the Delhi's criminals turned sadists, these two. And like that, Photo is about two young children, school children. They see the photos of the newlyweds, in the dailies, publish the photo. It's a usual thing in Kerala to publish Vivahidarayi, newlyweds. So this boy and girl, about 8 years old or 10 years old, they make an album of these photos they collect. And once they wanted to take a photo of themselves, in the local studio. Like, not that they are the newlyweds, but to pose like that. And they walk into the studio. They don't have the money, but they have some money which they saved in the piggy bank, one of them, the girl. And the studio man, the photographer, the ever-smiling photographer, traps them. And obviously, the indication is that he is abusing the girl. And the boy looks on, powerless, when the man carries her off on the carrier of a bicycle. It was such a shocker, this kind of a powerful impact that the story has brought. So these two stories I am citing as examples of the Malayalam story in theme and form and technique, all combined
They
together
are
now.
among the greatest
Yeah.
you've ever read.
So
Right.
I can say these two are great stories.
Right. I was just thinking while listening to you that in the Indian languages, the short story has pride of place in many ways as a form that everybody reads, publishes, all of that. Whereas when it comes to English, especially in contemporary reading and writing, you often find people being defensive about the short story. As in, the descriptions are always, well, it's slightly less than the novel. Why don't, and publishers will go to writers who write short stories and say, why don't you try and write a novel? Because, that will help us sell more. So there is a defensiveness in that story of the short story in English, whereas in the Indian languages, it seems like a celebratory narrative and far from defensive. So, Manu, is there a history to the way short stories have been written and published in the languages, and in Odia in particular, that allows this to happen? How did the short story become the most popular form?
Yeah, thank you, Karthika. Namaskar. In fact, let me start that without story, you can't live. Even if one day all of us will become a story also. Second thing is that in Odia, Odia is the first language in Indian languages, which was based on whom the first state was carved out in 1936 April 1st. That is the first language-based state. So our first story, if at all you go from the history, from 1898, Fakir Mohan Senapati, who happens to be the father of modern Odia literature, he wrote one such a story called Rebati. Has a epic status in Odisha. Not a single person is there who does not know about Rebati story.
You want to tell us something about what Rebati is about?
Rebati is the first story. It is girl, 11, 12 years girl. They have a small family, nucleus family, father, mother, the girl, and the grandmother. Father wants that his daughter should be educated. You can understand that the women education in 1898 was almost all non-existent in Odisha. At least I know. So she was also dreaming to be to go to school and learn. Unfortunately, her grandmother, she was not in favor of women education. And she was telling, if a girl is educated, then the whole family will be destroyed. Unfortunately, the cholera broke out. Father first died, then mother, then the daughter, then the aunt, grandmother. Everybody was perished. And it is such a heartbreaking story. I have got an anthology called Rebati, edited by me, translated into all Indian languages, 24 languages and 12 foreign languages, total 33 languages. So it has received very well because many foreigners have written to me personally that they have never read such type of story written 125 years before. And that is the first story. But what I wanted to tell, what makes a good story or a great story? That is what I was just, because our subject was that. A great story always talks about the management of empathy. If it is well managed of empathy by the writer, by the characters depicted, then it is certainly a great story. We have many great stories in Odia, and I just quoted, I was thinking in the morning, I was scribbling 10 stories like Rebati, one, then is Budha Shankari. How a bangle seller, see that old man comes every day, every month to sell the bangles to a particular village, and see one recently married daughter-in-law. But after some days, he came and found that he has become a widow. And it is such a well narrated, and you will have heartbreaking situation is there. So that empathy, the love of a old man to a unknown daughter-in-law, and as if he was feeling as if his daughter has become widow. That is what the empathy they have run. Regarding without women, Mansar Bilap is another story, is a very great story called by Kalindi Charan Panigrahi. Between the love between the two, one is Dora, another is one dog and another deer. When a Britisher comes to the landlord's house and the landlord was very busy to serving his guest. The guest wants that deer to be killed and served in the one. And you can see the character, the dog, how he's behaving, all these things after the Dora is killed. So that is what all about Odia. Shikar, everybody knows it has become a film by Bhagwati Charan Panigrahi. By Mr. Mrinal Sena has made the film. So there are so many stories. Shwam Mohare Patar, it is a leaf in the stream by one Mr. Kaur. That is a great story written during that the life during the Britishers' time.
So, are you saying empathy is the one
It is not only
unifying
empathy,
character?
it is the pitch, then it is the sharp voice, it is the memorable character, it is a strong theme, insightful theme. All this makes a story great.
Right.
Yeah.
Arunava,
It is not only.
let me turn to Arunava and ask him what he thinks about this. Arunava also teaches, he's at the Ashoka University in Delhi, and you take the story into the classroom. You talk about storytelling, you read stories together with your students, they write about it. So two parts to my question to you. One is, what do you think makes the story great? What is your idea of it and why? But also, what do you do with a great story once you've discovered it? What does a teacher do with a great story?
Okay, thank you. It was really fascinating listening to these potted accounts of the stories that you've included in your anthologies. So first of all, I'm always worried about saying a story is one thing, or there's one thing that makes a story great. Each story is unique in its own way. But I always think of a story as being much longer than the words, because it opens up all these spaces which then the reader fills in on their own. So it's like a chapter from their life, but you start thinking about what happened before this, how did they get to this point, and what will happen after. And if I may I tell a short story? Yeah. So which raises these questions. It's a story by the writer Shankar. It's called The Priest's Manual. So there's this person who's always made a living as a priest, and his daughter, his wife is dead, who moved after the partition of Bengal. They moved to Calcutta, and they find it hard to make a living. And this man goes around offering priestly services. But times are changing, and now his services are no longer required like before. At the community Durga Pujas, he was much in demand earlier, but now they no longer call him very often. His daughter studies, and the father is very keen that she gets through college and gets on to get a job and so on. But the daughter has other plans. The daughter wants to be an actor. Not because she thinks it's glamorous, but because she thinks her father's ways of trying to eke out a living is not going to work. So she needs to do something that will bring much more money, and of course the fame and everything else that goes with it. So the priest this year is not been called to officiate at the local neighborhood Durga Puja. He goes up to them and he says, what's going on? And they say, no, we found other ways. He says, no, you must let me do it. I've always done it traditionally. And they succumb to pressure and said, fine. He gives them a long list of things that are required. And one of the things that is required, apparently, this I learned from the story, is that you have to get a clump of earth from, apologies in advance for what I'm about to say, you have to collect a clump of earth from outside a brothel. That is one of the key ingredients that will go into sanctifying a Durga Puja ceremony. And normally there are people who will do it, but now when he says somebody has to go and collect it, he says no. They tell him, no, you collect it yourself. So he actually, because it's in the rule book, in the manual, he actually goes. And then the women there and the pimps, they mock him, they laugh at him, and they throw him and say, you're so old and you still haven't gotten over your desires, and what is this? Get out of here. You don't belong here. And he goes off and he doesn't know what to do. And he comes home and he finds that there's a man who's driven up in a car outside his home and is asking neighbors for his daughter. Where does she live? And he goes up to him and says, what do you want with my daughter? And he says, well, she's going to audition for a film role. I spoke to her and she's agreed to audition. And he tells this guy, get out of here. You have no business with my daughter. And the guy is half drunk and he says, well, there are plenty of women I can get. your daughter is nothing special, but it was she who wanted, so you better let me in because she's going to be very angry with you. And he says, no, I don't care, get out of here. No daughter of mine is going to be a film actor. And he goes back home and he tells his daughter, what have you been doing? And she has a confrontation with her father and she says, you know, your way of life is over. You have to let us do the things that we want to do. This is what I want to do. And you can't stop me. You may have stopped this man, but I will find another way of doing it. And the story ends with him walking out of his front door. He picks up a clump of earth from outside his front door and he takes it to the Durga Puja place and he says, we need this. We've got it. So yeah, it's really a goosebumps kind of story. And it's the kind of story where you hate what the guy stands for, but you can't help feeling for him. And that's the most amazing thing that a story will do. And you wonder, how did he get this way? You know, what's going on here? It's a few moments from their lives, literally a day or two. But there's so much more. And what will happen after this? So that to me is what a story is. A short story doesn't end. It just leaves off somewhere and lets you figure out what's going to happen afterwards.
Yeah.
So to answer your question about the classroom, what we do is that we read short stories for our creative writing students. We read them very closely and slowly. So a story that runs to a few pages might take us an entire week to read. And we try to really tell everyone that great literature is great because you imagine yourself there somehow. You could be a participant, you could be a witness. More often than not, you're a witness. But you're a witness who has very strong feelings for what you're witnessing. You can't step out of it afterwards and say, fine, something happened, let me move on. It changes you in some way. And we examine what is it that changes you. What has the writer done that has really gone to the core of something that also affects you, even if you share nothing with the characters or their settings or anything. How does it move you? Where is this emotional center of the story? We try to identify that. And we try to think about the spaces that have been left blank and what could you fill in there. So very often we end up writing sequels
Okay, that's
to stories
yeah.
or prequels,
Right.
whichever is relevant. And then, you know, you get, if it's a class of 15 people, you get 15 different directions in which the story goes. And then you realize how great literature is because it allows you to form your own story out of what there is.
Perfect. I think that was amazing. Which is also a good point to go to the writer on our panel. Chandan writes in Hindi, and I requested him to speak in Hindi if he could, because I do think most of the people in this audience will be okay with that. Or do you? Yes. Chandan, over to you. What are the great stories? Do you write great stories yourself? Or do you read them?
He totally writes great stories.
Tell us more about your writing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Thank you. About greatest stories, which title says. So one couplet I remember apt for this subject is from Momin. तुम मेरे पास होते हो गोया जब कोई दूसरा नहीं होता. तो ये जो महान कहानियां हैं, means I can tell why they are great for me. I am very small to judge or give any verdict on their greatness. How great these stories are for me, I will tell you. When I have hit 40s, so then I have started understanding the true meaning of loneliness and solitude and all these things. Before that, I had read all things like a parrot. Now, whenever I come from office, many a times I do it deliberately. I prepare a big mug of coffee or tea for myself and then I sit deliberately. I sit and I try to be with those characters which now I have started loving. For instance, I will tell about one book that is by W.G. Sebald, that is Ostrich. I had read this novel when I was in graduation and I had forgot. But slowly this novel came to me, and now in last 2-3 years I have read it twice or thrice. And many a times I read a few pages and then I think of those characters. the kind of character build-up or the narration is there in that novel. A person, how he shatters a strongest person created in a character as a character. He has everything. He is professor. He is living in London. Everything is there with him. He has no history, which is the biggest baggage to a man is the history. He has no history as well. But then how he shatters, how he is remembering his mother. That whenever I think of that character, even now I am getting my this part of soft part of ear burning sensation. I feel that temperature. Sometimes I feel feverish with all these stories, which I love. Another story is of Milan Kundera, that is immortality. I find that how on the earth somebody can write like that. That character, that lady, which is again a mother. The way she is exploring her life, and then again that shattering I mentioned, I am remembering one scene. If you have seen castor seed shattering, have you seen that? Have you heard the sound? It makes a sound, and that shattering is there in those novels for a person, for a human being. How they are managing the society? How are they coping up with the life? Again, because I am talking about the mothers now, one more story which I like the most, and that story I read like a ritual before writing anything. Whether my subject is there of any relevance to that story or not, but as a ritual I read. That is Tuesday's Siesta by Marquez. If I don't read that, I hardly start writing. So these are few things, a few stories which I have loved, and I found these as a great because I love them. Why they are great, I don't know. But how they are great to me, this much I can tell as a reader.
So I'm curious, there is no Hindi story in that great stories narrative of yours?
No, actually, no. I thought that I should not sound like a representative of Hindi.
No, but you yourself as an
Yeah,
individual.
I'll tell you. There are many great stories. Sir was mentioning the classroom stories. One story we read, you must have read if you have Hindi in class 11th, Gunda by Jaishankar Prasad. Wonderful love story. And then if I go on this naming things like Renu has written Kalank Mukti, Rahi Masum Raja, Oski Boond, all these fantastic stories. Even new means calling them great will be a kind of partiality because those are my contemporary writers. But if you know Hindi, if you know reading Hindi, you must read one writer who is contemporary to me, Kunal Singh. The way he writes, the way he means for him, I will say that he plays in the time of blurb writing. Playfulness has been a kind of abused word, but really someone is playing with the language. He is Kunal. So the way he writes, he has written one story about a simple breakup. If I tell the summary of that story, it will kill the story. So I'll not tell that. But if you have to read the power of the language in Hindi, you read Uday Prakash, Kunal, Akhilesh, Yogendra Ahuja. One writer who is a must read in Hindi is Raju Sharma. So there are very, very good works going in Hindi, but I just don't want it to sound like a
representative. Yeah. Yes, I know. Okay, I feel like the person who starts speaking always ends up speaking the least while the panel gathers steam. So Preeti, I'm going to come back to you before perhaps we could go to the audience for the last 10 minutes for questions. You tell us a little bit more about the kinds of stories that you worked with, the writers you work with. How do you discover writers who are, as you said, less known or less read in other languages? And I do want the panel to also talk a little bit about translation, because this is key to all the conversation we're having here. We're speaking in English about stories in different languages. So what do you have to say about your experience of translating stories across languages? But first, Preeti, will you?
Thank you. Yeah, so there are 2-3 things that I could mention because I think I'm much more enamored with non-fiction because non-fiction is actually coming out of your own life, and that is also what makes fiction. So there is a point of at which both coalesce. And for me, the stories, even the fiction that is written out of real events or things that have happened, perhaps in our own country, which we are completely unaware of, those are something that speak to me because it's things that I am also learning for the first time. And I do think that they are important because they also go into the larger nation building exercise and so on. So it seems to me to be important. And as something that you said, Arunava, earlier, the fact that you can actually place yourself there, you can see that this is what is happening, and there is a huge amount of empathy, and therefore you connect with that story or with that with whatever that situation might be or that person might be. And for that reason also, it's writings like memoirs and autobiographies that also I seem to enjoy a great deal. So because I mentioned the Northeast, I'll go back there. We had a discussion yesterday, and that is a story I feel, he's actually placed it in Mizoram. He's talked about the 20 years of violent agitation, insurgency that happened there that I don't think many people are aware of. A lot of people have heard the name Lal Denga, but they don't know, what happened. So this is a fictional account of that particular insurgency and what triggered it, what happened. Again, it's very interesting because it starts with the flowering of the bamboo. The bamboo flowers every 50 years, and then there's a rat population that comes out, starts eating the bamboo, starts then eating granaries, finishing off all the food in the villages, and then therefore people start to starve. And that is what causes this particular insurgency that is triggered off in Mizoram. So similarly, I mean, if I can name one more, which were real events but which became fiction, and therefore I think a lot of other people also find it interesting to read because it's now fictionalized. But there is a point at which reportage and reality actually gets into fiction. So the other story that I want to mention was an Ahomia novel written by Rita Chaudhary, which has been translated into English also and won awards and things. And it's a story of tea, but it's also a story of the Chinese in India. And what happened to the Chinese community that was brought in by the British because of tea plantations, but then later decided to, they just stayed on and intermarried and so on. Then the China War happens in '62, and then all these people are picked up from various places across the country and taken off to an internment camp in Rajasthan. What that does to them, that kind of, breaks up families, all of that. And then in the meantime, ships come from China to take these people back. Many people go back, many people stay behind because by then the war is over. Do you know this slice of your own history? You don't. So we all go to eat Chinese food, we go to Chinese hairdressers, but what is this thing? How did these guys come here and how did they just stay behind? So these are the sorts of stories that actually are real life, but then, of course, they are, so far out that it seems like fiction. So those are the sorts of things that I'd really say is something that attracts me a lot.
Right. I did want to talk about translation, but I see we have 8 minutes left, 8.5 minutes. So if there are any questions that you would like to address to the panel, maybe we should do that first. Yeah. I can see several hands. Is there a mic going around? Yeah, he's coming. Okay.
There is one story of a great writer, but never been told. If Preeti and Karthika are ready to find it out, I'm ready to organize. There's a great writer called Leo Tolstoy. He and his wife lived in the same house, but last 2 years of his life, they never met each other, ate together, talked in the same house. Why did it happen? Nobody has written this story. If both of you are ready, I am prepared to write to President Putin and organize it.
Can I just say something?
I know the story.
No, just want to add something to this. There is a brilliant novel called Funeral Nights, written by Kin Farm Singh, which has two characters like this who live in the same room almost and don't talk to each other for over a year because they fought about something. They do eventually make up though. But if while Tolstoy's story is coming to us, please also read Funeral Nights.
Can I also mention one of Chandan's stories, which is not directly related, but it's a family where all the members of the family forget the existence of one member. They forget that he existed.
Yeah, my name is Sujata. I would like to know, Karthika, as you said, that English publishers are not so enthusiastic about publishing short stories. Do they find it hard to sell, or what is the reason? Though readers love short stories.
I think it's a combination of factors. One is that, yes, we do find that readers tend to not pick up or discover new collections of stories. So there is a greater ease of marketing and selling novels. I also think that it's something that seems to affect, as I said, the English language more than any other Indian languages. So occasionally you will have, like, if a Jhumpa Lahiri writes a collection of stories in English, there is a different energy, saleability, marketability to it, right? But there is a reluctance among all of you to discover Indian writers who do interesting things. I mean, that's the truth of why I think our readership is less than it should be. So it's a problem.
Thank you.
Arunava, this is a question for you. I know all of you sort of told us that, what makes a great story. It's eternal and, it makes you curious about what happens later. But I was curious to know about your process when you brought the book out. I'm sure there were many, many stories that fit that criteria. And yet you had to make that choice, this story and not that story, though both might have met all those criteria. What was your process to pick one over the other?
Thank you for that question. Every time any anthology is reviewed, it's always reviewed on the basis of the contents page and what's not been included, never what's actually in the book. But very honestly, it's just the stories that speak to me personally more than any others. And that doesn't mean that there are only 25 or 35 or 50 of them. Eventually, you just close your eyes and you stab and say, okay, I'm going with this one. And if someone gives me a chance to do another anthology, I'll do another 25. But really, it's stories that have stayed with me, let's say, that I've read over many years of reading and which I continue to remember. Very, very personal criterion.
Yes, I will tell. I will just add one thing. Recently, I have published an anthology in which there are 30 short stories I have taken from 1898 to till couple years back. But many people in Odisha used to accuse me that I have not taken Mr. 1, A, B, C, D like this. They have 3, 4 like this they have told. But I have given them a list that I could have taken 20 other writers also in that line, because it was it was so much a heavy, such a fat book. I was apprehending that the publisher will stall the project. So that is the reality. But many people think that we ignore them. It is not like that. What you told, beyond that stories, there are so many stories also to be included.
So if I may add a little here to what, excuse me, I just going to add to what you said about the saleability of the short story. In the languages, especially in Malayalam, I know firsthand, the short story collection is almost as saleable as the novel. There's absolutely no problem. The problem is when it is translated into English. English translation, you don't look at collection or an anthology of short stories as saleable. There is something like poetry. Poetry has this problem. There's no market for poetry, and there's no market for short stories. But that's not the case with the languages.
One other point that I just wanted to say to what she said earlier about stories is also that the system is set up almost structurally to benefit the novel. So if you look at prizes, like even the prizes that we have for short fiction or whatever, for fiction, it's always for the novel. We can't even submit short story collections for most of the literary awards. So there is already this prejudice that the short story is somehow lesser, so collections of short stories cannot be eligible for a big prize, which compounds the problem. Yes, sir.
Taking forward what we have been discussing about short stories and long stories, it is not that the Indian language short stories are more popular and English short stories don't sell, and publishers prefer English writers to write novels because they sell more. Ultimately, it depends on the appeal of the story and the message of the story. For example, in the past, Arthur Conan Doyle's short stories sold millions. And more recently, Jeffrey Archer's short stories are selling by the millions. So ultimately, what is important is the message that the story gives or the content. And it's little easier to have more content in a long story. That's why probably people prefer long stories. You can have so many incidents and suspense comes in the end. So people look forward to long reading rather than reading in a few minutes a short story. I think the appeal of the story is more important than the length of the story to sell.
So I think from what we've been hearing, everybody on this panel has basically been saying the short story is capable of great power and meaning, and that the novel is not in any sense greater. So you basically countered what people here think, I think, but that's fair enough. It's the way you would like to see it. Anybody there? Yeah.
I hope you can hear me. So I'm currently a student of Indian literature, especially Indian English literature. But one thing, this can be answered by anyone on the panel. Since all of you anthologize in different languages, and now there's this whole nation-building exercise of bringing India together as a nation, as a populace, rather than different regions or different states. But because of historically how India has been, the way publishing has happened, sometimes some languages have been marginalized or willfully suppressed, and there are other distinctions of class, etc. Do you think there can ever be one sort of unifying story or unifying body of work that can encompass India together? Do you think it's ever possible? Or are historical divisions so large that maybe it can never happen?
No, it has happened many times. I will tell you one story. It was translated into Hindi from Tamil. I had read when I was in intermediate. Story name was वह लड़की जिसने इंजन ड्राइवर से प्यार किया. Wonderful story. Means you are from UP, from Bihar, from Tamil Nadu. You can relate very well with that story. And it is not true about one story. Maximum of the stories, whatever I told, all three were written in German or Spanish. So that is the unique thing of story writing, that you can relate, if it is good, from anywhere, from everywhere.